Welcome to another episode of Effed Up Stories. I'm your host, Will Pender, and here with me is my co-host, Ryan Sharp. And joining us is our very
Hi,
special
everybody.
guest. And joining us is our very special guest, Chris O'Brien.
Simsalabim.
So, Chris, you've got like 20 years of the paranormal research under your belt, and you're the author of 4 books. Mysterious Valley, Enter the Valley, Secrets of the Mysterious Valleys, and Stalking the Tricksters. And you're the first international investigator at the Sherman Ranch, which aka a Skinwalker Ranch, which some of my favorite stories comes from. What can you tell us about your involvement with the Sherman Ranch?
I've been treading very lightly, keeping my head down, my mouth shut, and my shoes tied.
So that's scary out there, hey?
Well, it's one thing to give a billionaire a pedicure. It's another thing to stamp on his feet. So, I've been trying to keep a pretty low profile over the years, in terms of my involvement or opinion of the case, other than the fact that I think it is the most, potentially, at least in my estimation, my humble opinion, one of the most important ongoing cases of the paranormal in the annals of paranormal investigation. I don't want to sound like I'm, over touting the importance of the case, but I really do feel that it's the only case that really drew me out of the San Luis Valley in the first 13 years that I was investigating in Colorado, and 16 years later, I still feel the same way. I think we're dealing with a really important scenario there, and I don't want to get myself or anybody else in trouble in terms of some of the things that I've been looking into, some of my research, some of the sources that have come forward with uncorroborated stories and whatnot. So I am treading very lightly in terms of this particular case, but I do think it's very important.
Well, and I'll state up front, like for Ryan and I, as Ryan put it, we're just armchair investigators. I mean, all we have is books and Google. Like, we don't have the opportunities to go out. So anything that we have misconstrued, I apologize. That's I'm not saying anything we say is accurate or whatever, and I'm hoping
No, as a matter of fact, I haven't heard, I understand, I guess that you've done a second show. I haven't heard a second show about the case, but I think 90% of the information that you stated, at least in the first show, was very accurate. You got some nuances a little wrong here or there, but nothing in terms of substantial facts and information. I don't, I'm not saying that I should tread lightly and you're not. I'm not saying that at all.
No.
I'm just saying I have a a 14-year history, 15-year history with the case, and so it's it's one thing to be involved directly. I was one of the last people really to speak with Terry about the case, Terry Sherman, and I worked closely with David Perkins, who did the last actual official interview with Terry, which is I think on the Utah UFO Hunters or Alien Dave website. The Ranch from Hell is the name of the article. And I did work with David and convinced Terry at least to do one last interview before he signed his non-disclosure agreement with Bigelow's organization, NIDS. So I think it's important for people like you and Ryan to really dig into this and keep the pressure on. Ryan Skinner or somebody else, Ryan Layton, David Weatherly. There's a number of investigators that over the years have kept the pressure on NIDS and have really plumbed sources and really pumped sources in the area there in the Uinta Basin around Fort Duchesne for information and to keep at least keep some sort of objective investigation going, from the outside looking in. And I appreciate any attention that shows like yours and others are bringing to bear on the case. I think it's really important. This is really a major case. No two ways about it.
You know, at the end of our Skinwalker Ranch episode, I kind of focused a little bit on the NIDS organization itself, and like you said, since they've taken over the ranch, their stance on it is, all right, we're attacking this from from the scientific theory. We're going to follow the scientific model, and that doesn't include disclosing unsubstantiated accounts from this person or that person. And I wonder, do you feel that there's been some attempt made by the NIDS organization to really stonewall, all the information since they've taken over? It just seems like we've been stonewalled.
Well, I'm sure you understand that scientists, when they come up with some sort of petri dish that they want to study, they don't give a play-by-play dissertation or some sort of commentary while they're doing the actual scientific investigation. In other words, you don't allow any sort of outside influence, or you don't disseminate any of your findings until you're able to come up with a conclusion. Now, that's how the scientific method is. In other words, if somebody's coming up with a cure for cancer, they're not going to be going to the media or sharing with outside investigators the results of their day-to-day or week-to-week or year-to-year research and investigative process. It's just not going to happen. That's not how science is done. In other words, you don't publicize your experiment before you come up with something that you can stand behind. So in that sense, they have this kind of convenient, plausible deniability where they don't really need to divulge anything. And the fact that they actually have allowed, Colin Kelleher and George Knapp to have access to a certain amount of information to then release the book, Hunt for the Skinwalker, which came out, I think, in 2005. That, I think, was kind of throwing us all a bone, because they really didn't want undue attention forcing their hand prior to being able to come up with any strong and definitive conclusions. But I think the book actually backfired. What it did was brought to the forefront the fact that there is something going on there. The book had no photographs. It had no data. It was just filled with anecdotal stories. Very few people were on the record. What it did was it opened the door for more speculation. So I think by throwing us a bone and trying to keep everybody satisfied, that they were divulging at least something, it actually backfired on them, and it created more interest in more scrutiny, and caused more people to ask more questions about what is really going on up there. So, this is really sticky ground. Remember, we're dealing with a world-class scientific organization that was up there doing experiments, having the gear, having, accredited scientists involved in the whole process. So, they were trying to play both sides of the fence, and I think it came back and bit them from both directions. So, no, I don't think they've been stonewalling us. In fact, I think that they've given out more information than they really were obliged to do. Remember, this guy is investing millions of his own dollars as a private citizen to engage in a private investigation, and we really don't have a right to know. When it comes down to it, the very fact that they have been able to release certain information through some sort of sanitized filters or whatever, however you want to, couch it. I think it's a good thing, and I don't fault Bigelow and Colin Kelleher and George Onett and the veterinary pathologist that was involved up there, and I could go down a list of names that have not been quoted, and thank them for at least sharing as much of their data. Well, maybe not data, but sharing some of the stories that have come out of that place. However, there have been some events that have been alleged to have occurred there that may be highly sensational and may deserve some attention by people like yourselves and me and other investigators that have been involved with monitoring the case for years. So, in answer to your question, no, I don't think we've been stonewalled. I think actually they've been throwing us bones. But are you satisfied? I'm not. I'd
No.
like to see something published. I'd like to see them at least state on the record that they don't have a clue what's going on up there. And if that's not the case, then I want to know what they think is going on up there. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I can totally agree with that. I mean, in fact, when the book came out, I mean, that's where a lot of people, like, I've heard of Skinwalker Ranch before, but it wasn't until I got my hands on the book that I could really see, like, at least read about all these different cases of high strangeness that wasn't really easy to find on the internet. Now, have you ever spoken, or I know you've spoken. Have you ever collaborated with the NIDS team, or had any involvement with what they were doing up on the ranch?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, I was one of the few publicly acknowledged investigators back in the mid '90s that actually was dogging the National Institute of Discovery Sciences and Robert Bigelow to publish papers, put up a website, share your data, at least bring in outside people that could help maybe provide some sort of objective analysis to help you. Don't keep it all in-house. Don't keep it all, closed off to the outside world. And, I think begrudgingly, I may have, somehow been partially responsible in some small way to get NIDS to actually put up a website, to get them to publish papers. Back in the day, in the mid to late 90s, NIDS published some very, very important papers that I think are often overlooked in the field. Their analysis of the unusual livestock death phenomenon, cattle mutilations. I think they came up with several very good papers concerning that particular mystery and some of the cases that they investigated, and tissue samples and plant samples and stuff they had analyzed, and some of the work they did in that realm. You have not seen anything published officially about the Sherman Ranch case, but NIDS in general, I think. It took some effort on my part and just a handful of other investigators to get them to actually open up to the extent that they did. As far as any direct involvement, with them about the ranch, no way. I mean, I'm the last person they would want to ask for help. I'm a nosy journalist in their mind. But I must say, getting to the point in '99 where I had been dogging them for 4 or 5 years, and I think I stamped on enough toes enough times where I started to get a little nervous. When you start getting interesting, rather aggressive emails from the ex-head of non-lethal weapons development at Los Alamos, you like I said, I'll give John Alexander a pedicure, but I'm not going to be stamping on his toes too often. And it got to the point where I felt, I had made my point, and now it's time to bury the hatchet and say, look, I'm in the San Luis Valley. I've investigated or researched over 200 cases of cattle, livestock deaths, horses, cows, what have you, deer, elk, buffalo, sheep, goats, pigs, even believe it or not, a squirrel that appeared to be mutilated,
Really?
and a coyote.
Wow.
So I got to a point where I felt that I had ruffled enough feathers, stamped on enough toes to bury the hatchet and say, okay, I'm ready to work with you guys. So they supplied me with a promise to do all my lab work, pay my vets to do necropsies in the field, local veterinarians in the San Luis Valley in Colorado. I passed out all the protocols. I got all my ducks in a row. Everybody was on the same page, and I was ready to go. We were going to work together, and I didn't have another unusual livestock death case for 7 years. so I tried.
So, Chris, were you there before? You were there before the NIDS team, right?
I was the one that gave Terry Sherman Bigelow's phone number and Lawrence Rockefeller's phone number. And before he could call them to try to sell them the ranch, Bigelow read, the Deseret News article written by Zach Van Eck. He read the article and like a day later, I think, or 2 days later, called him and inquired about about purchasing the ranch.
So, what kind of stuff did you come across? Like, what was the first stuff that you saw out there that you're like, wow, like this is amazing what's going on out here. Like, people have to come in and check this out.
Well, I should probably kind of digress a little bit and sort of, give your listeners a sense of how I got involved. I was called by Zach Van Eck, who, released the series of, I think, 2 or 3 articles for the Deseret News that first exposed the case back in July of '96. And just prior to the first article coming out, he called me out of the blue and said, hey, I'm not sure if he had read my book, or he at least was aware of it and was aware of my work in the San Luis Valley. I think he had read my book. And he said, look, I've got this rancher in Utah. He's going through some amazing stuff. He gave me a thumbnail sketch of the case. And he said, look, this guy needs to talk to somebody. He really needs somebody that he can, open up to and talk to, somebody that, he can trust, that won't think he's crazy, and perhaps give him some advice on what to do. And he said, this guy really needs a friend, basically, who is open enough about this subject matter to listen to him. So I immediately, as soon as I hung up with Zach, I grabbed Terry's number, which he had given me, and called him and had a long conversation with him. And Terry said, look, why don't you come up here? It'd be much better if you came up here, got a sense of the place, et cetera. And I think a day or two later, I did the 470-mile trip, and it was 105 degrees when I got up to his ranch. It was I went up with a friend. We had no air conditioning in the truck, and I went with my brother and our Pyrenees dog, co-investigator. I actually used this Pyrenees on all my cattle mutilation investigations. He was the first one on the scene generally. So the 4 of us went up there, Cato being the 4th, and we got there, and I basically sat the afternoon with Terry. My brother and Art and the dog stayed in the car. Basically, they stayed out of the way. They never met Terry. They were never involved in the process. And I basically interviewed him and didn't ask to see anything. When I go out and do an investigation, especially something as potentially monumental as this case, I go in there as a complete sponge. I don't offer anything. I don't ask to see anything. I don't demand this, prove this, show me this. I just sit there and let the guy open up and talk to me. And I write copious notes. And the first thing he showed me was a series of triangular punch marks in his field. I think they were about 40 feet between these triangular it was a triangular array of circular punches into his pasture right out in front of his house. And later we found out he had some guy that worked for a mining company that his job was to determine whether the ground could handle certain weights of equipment. So the guy, he basically was able to look at these marks in the field and determine how much weight it took to produce them. And we're talking, the circles were about 14 inches across. They were punched in, at least 3 or 4 inches into the hard pan. And he estimated it would take about 9 tons, I think Terry's analogy was about a railroad boxcar. The weight of a railroad boxcar to punch these marks. And there were a number of these arrays around his field. And then he pointed up to a row of cottonwood trees at the end of the pasture there, and he said, these big apertures would open in the air right out in front of my house, like a camera aperture spinning open.
Yeah.
And these triangular objects would float through and then shoot off these smaller objects, refrigerator-sized objects. And he said one day, and this was fairly recent, to the time I was up there, I think it happened that prior spring or maybe June, like a month or two before. I'd have to check my notes on that. But he said one guy evidently hadn't been trained, or Terry said he was a rookie. He came through way too fast through the portal, and he slammed into the tops of his cottonwood trees and knocked and lopped the tops of the trees off. He said, look at the branches. And sure enough, right there, well, were branches scattered on the ground from way up, 60 feet, 50 feet maybe, up these cottonwood trees, like something had come through and sheared off the tops of the trees. That was impressive to me because, that was physical evidence. But again, I didn't say, well, and do the Jack Webb thing, and just start firing questions at him. I just soaked up the information. I didn't press him. He mentioned videotapes that they had taken. I didn't ask to see them. I was hoping that he would invite me inside and show them to me. I really, when I go out initially on a case, I'm very, very, I tiptoe around to a certain degree. I really want to establish, a rapport with the person. I don't want to be pushy. I don't want to, put them into a position where they have to make a decision, yes or no, whether they're going to tell me something or show me something. I totally just, take what they give me and run with it. So at that point, I thought that this was the beginning of a long-term investigation that I was going to be undergoing. I was ready, for the long haul. And then within, a matter of 3 weeks, there was talk of selling the ranch, and then boom, the non-disclosure agreement. And I never got a chance to really go back up there and work with Terry. I was in constant phone contact with him. In fact, the famous case of the blue orb that came and checked out his wife and checked out his horse, and the lights dimmed, the ranch light dimmed, and the dogs took off after the blue light.
Yeah, that's the one that they found in the woods, and like the dogs had been turned into like a gray mush afterwards, right?
He said 3 grease piles is how he told me. I was on the phone with him while that event occurred.
Wow.
I was getting a play-by-play on the phone, and he said, I got to call you back. My dogs just took off after this thing. I'll call you back. He didn't call me back until the next morning, and he was very shaken, and he called me and told me that he never, he didn't find his dogs, but he found 3 grease piles that he assumed, had been his dogs. So when I saw that event, covered in Hunt for the Skinwalker, they weren't even close with the date. I mean, I wrote this thing down. It was, I think, the first week of August, '96. According to them in the book, I think they said April '95. So just that particular discrepancy kind of puts a wiggle in my thinking about how accurate some of the other dates are, or times, or details relating to the information in Hunt for the Skinwalker. I think obviously George Knapp is a world-class investigative journalist. I mean, let's get real. I'm one of his biggest fans. But again, once a certain amount of time goes by and people don't write stuff down, human memory is fallible. So, I wrote this stuff down literally as I was on the phone with Terry that night. I had the date down, the time, the duration. Coincidentally, I had just had that day a report of a very similar blue softball-shaped object that was reported zipping around a pasture. And so I felt that there was a pretty interesting correlation there between the Sherman Ranch object that was cited and described, and just coincidentally, synchronistically, having a report of the exact same type phenomena. So, again, I'm not slagging George or Colum in their work. They're obviously operating, to the best of their abilities. I don't find anything in their work that smacks of subterfuge or trying to, cover things up or anything. I think they did as honest a job as they could, but if Terry's not writing stuff down, or if a witness in general doesn't write stuff down and has to go totally by recollection, I mean, that's why it's really important for listeners out there. If you guys want to get involved in this type of work, you have got to be religious and write everything down as soon as possible. Date, time, duration, description, location, name of the witness, and come up with some sort of categorization for the particular thing that you're documenting. So, I have really attempted to do this diligently over the years, and if you're going on just pure recollection, obviously you're never going to be able to get everything totally correct. So,
yeah, I can totally. Well, I can vouch for that because if I don't write something, well, not that I've had like a lot of paranormal experiences, but dates and stuff in particular is something that I tend to not be able to really get accurately. And sometimes, like when I'm recalling a story with someone else that I might have experienced it with, both of our dates are way off, and so that's a really good point. So, like, I would imagine, like,
One of the
oh, sorry, go on.
one of the more interesting points, I guess, of the whole Skinwalker Ranch and I guess is the whole area. I believe is the Utah Basin or Utah Basin. I'm not sure how you pronounce that.
Uinta.
But that whole area, yeah, we see UFO encounters, we see cryptid encounters, we see shadow men, and we see poltergeist activity. Yeah, I believe the term in the book used was Grand Central Station. This confluence of all these different paranormal events. I mean, can you? I guess I'm really wondering, what are your thoughts on that in particular?
Well, I really urge everyone out there to get a copy of the Great Utah UFO Display by Frank Salisbury, who worked with Junior Hicks, who was the first regional investigator that got involved up there at the Sherman Ranch. Salisbury and Hicks, all through the from 68, I think, through the 70s, documented an amazing, ebb and flow wave of UFO activity over the Uinta Basin. So there is, a history, at least a documented history of events that goes back into the late 60s, early 70s. The Great UFO Display is a real, I think, a dark horse important book in the annals of field investigation in UFOs. Frank Salisbury was was a science teacher, taught school for years. Junior Hicks, unsung hero, logged an amazing amount of investigative research and data entries for decades in the area. We do have a very well documented history of UFO activity in the area, centered around Fort Duchesne, I might add. That does seem to be the epicenter of activity. If you look at their book and the maps, they map out and they show where all the sightings are reported. There does seem to be a centralized sort of locale there around between Roosevelt, Vernal, and slightly south of Fort Duchesne, which is right, in the proximity of the ranch there. So in terms of all the other stuff, the cryptid stuff, the Dogmen reports, as recently as December 2009, very well documented series of sighting reports. Some of the elemental sightings, David Weatherly has come up, and Ryan Skinner has uncovered some really interesting anecdotal stories and reports that to me seem valid to some extent. Again, you're dealing with a very closed system, very superstitious Ute Indian population, very wary of outsiders. Again, this whole idea of the Skinwalker, that's not a Ute Indian tradition. That's a Dene tradition. And of course, the Ute were used as scouts by the U.S. cavalry during the subjugation of the Navajo. So, of course, there's been some animosity ever since. And it's not, it doesn't stretch one's imagination to imagine the Ute being a little paranoid about the Navajo sending skinwalkers in their direction because they helped the federal government, the U.S. federal government, subjugate the Navajo. So there is this kind of adversarial sort of protagonist-antagonist relationship, I think, on some level between the two peoples. So, but once you get into the whole Native American mythology and the legends and superstitions and beliefs, there's a lot of white boys that think that they know what they're talking about. And even the ones that do know what they're talking about don't have a clue. So you really have to take any sort of information dealing with Native American spiritual traditions with a grain of salt. As someone that's spent, quite a number of years attempting to make inroads in the Pueblo Indian culture, for instance, I can, I'll be the first one to tell you that you just can't take anything or everything at face value. You really have to, corroborate, triangulate, and and correlate your data and your information. I mean, we're talking about an oral tradition here. Nothing is written down, so you can't refer, you can't footnote this information. You have to, bounce it off a variety of sources and come up with sort of a synthesized view of a particular subject as it relates to Native American traditions. So, there is a lot of nuance involved here. Some stories say that the ranch area, that little valley, is a taboo area to the Ute. That they're not allowed to go there, and so let's sell it to the white boys, that sort of thing. I mean, it sounds feasible to me, but I've never seen any sort of indication that would prove that to be the case. In other words, a lot of this stuff is kind of by happenstance. People say this, people hear this. It's maybe even like a game of telephone. We really don't know. Frank Salisbury, who wrote the great Utah UFO display, he poo-poos the whole idea of the Sherman Ranch being anything special. He said, "Oh no, the people that lived there before, they had nothing go on." In fact, he just released 2 years ago a new edition of that book, and there is a little added section in there about his feelings about the Utah Skinwalker Ranch case. And he's not convinced that it's anything special. He says there's all sorts of weird stuff going on all around that area. That place isn't particularly special or important. In fact, he kind of debunks some of the assertions that have been made by Terry and by others about owners in the past having had amazing stuff happen. So you can't really sit in an armchair, guys, and really come up with the truth. You really need to dig. You need to go up there. You need to cultivate sources. You need to cross-correlate those sources. You need to, really put the time, the effort, and the energy, and marshal the resources to come up with as accurate of a database and information as possible. And that goes for me too. I mean, I've been very, very careful about what I've said about the ranch and certain things that I've heard that I haven't been able to corroborate or get a second and third, source for. So, especially when you're dealing with a billionaire,
Yeah, true.
So, if it was just, Joe Schmo, my name's Manuel Gomez and I'm a rancher and this is what I think, you might go in there and, act a certain way. But if it's some billionaire that has world-class scientists, you're going to, with respect, you're going to tread lightly. So, it's only been recently that I've really been willing to talk about this case at length publicly. This is like the third radio show I've ever done about it, really.
Well, I'm flattered for for you to come on and for us to be the third show. So, Chris, I would imagine you've done a lot of talking with the locals at around the area just to see, what the feeling was.
I haven't done a lot of talking with the locals, but I have been in close contact with investigators that have done a lot of talking with the locals.
Okay.
There is a difference. I mean, that's
true.
Secondhand and third hand as opposed to primary witness and second hand. So, but I pick and choose my investigator sources and associates and very carefully. I don't rumor monger and play National Enquirer with information that I'm privy to or potentially privy to. I do the work. I try to get corroboration on particular aspects of a case, and I work with people that I trust that, number one, their veracity, obviously, but I also trust their objectivity and their how up to speed they are in dealing with a particular subject. And this goes, in general, not only the Sherman Ranch case, but in general. So
it's like a methodology that you'd follow, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, out of the people that you've spoken to, given some that you have a high respect for, that you trust that they're telling everything that they know is true. You could take their word for it, kind of a thing. Was there anything that you heard that was especially interesting that you'd be comfortable to talk about that many people wouldn't know?
Well, at the risk of getting myself in trouble again here, I did hear in 2004 about a particular well-known physicist who was in England, hobnobbing with some notable people, including Nick Cook, who was the chief investigative reporter for Jane's Defense Weekly, Uri Geller, and a number of other people that shall remain nameless. But he heard a story about some deaths of security personnel up at the ranch. There was no day described to this. There was no method of, there was no scenario, whether it was a firefight, whether it was some sort of sickness. There was no indication of how these people allegedly died. But it was compelling enough for him to start making phone calls once he got back from England. And he started calling around. Of course, the first person he called was Zach Van Eck, who broke the story back in '96 for the Deseret News. And Zach hadn't heard anything about this. And so Zach called my buddy David Perkins, who wrote the article, The Ranch from Hell, which was the last full interview with Terry. And but this particular physicist, when he called Zach, didn't tell him not to say anything to anybody. There was no I'm just going to tell you this. This is secret. Don't spread this around for your ears only, basically. That was never stated. So Zach called Izzy, David Perkins, and since he hadn't been put under any threat of silence or whatever, he didn't say anything to Izzy. And, of course, Izzy called me.
So, I mean, nobody really knows how these people die, but, I mean...
Well, I'm getting to that.
Okay. Go on, sorry.
It's a little bit involved, but I do have to preface this account just to cover my own ass, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So anyway, the physicist called Zach, didn't tell him not to tell anybody. Zach called David. David hadn't heard anything, so he called me and said, "Have you heard anything about this?" And I said, "Hell no, I haven't heard anything, but boy, I'm going to go out and ask." So, I had this private bulletin board at this point with about 30 people on it. And I happened to just post the innocuous, new thread that said, "Anybody hear of any, suspicious deaths at the Sherman Ranch?" And I'll tell you, I mean, I don't think it was an hour or two later. I don't know how the hell the physicist found out about the posting, but I all of a sudden came under cyber attack. And for the next 2 weeks, I had to exhaust all efforts at damage control because this particular physicist is well known within the defense and intelligence communities and in the, shall we say, the cutting edge progressive wing of the physicist. The physicists out there. I'm trying not to divulge names here, even though he's already publicly stated this. So basically, it just spun out of control. Well, this was back 8 years ago. And since then, I've always had this particular strange rumor, kicking around in the back of my Sherman Ranch head here. And interestingly enough, I have corroborated some very unusual activity that happened in late summer '99 that is totally unexplainable in terms of helicopter activity, convoys of SUVs, stated suicides by individuals out on the ranch. All sorts of different law enforcement agencies were witnessed out there. And I have been able to get 2 independent confirmations of something unusual happening either the end of July, beginning of August of 1999 that had to do with a death or deaths. In one version, it's a single death. In another version, it's possibly 2 of individuals out on the ranch. None of the corroborative accounts mentioned security personnel, as was stated in the original rumor that was reported in England to the physicist. So, but I have been able over the years to get some corroboration from locals and not only myself, but another investigator who's been up there on a number of occasions, who I will omit their name. See me after class if you really have a need to know. But it's enough. There's enough compelling correlation in my mind to take this as potential corroboration and possibly validation of something very unusual involving people dying or a person dying out on the ranch in the summer of '99.
So basically, we're talking very suspicious deaths.
Yes, that have, to my knowledge, I have not done. I've suggested to people that are more involved in the case than I am to really dig into this, and I know people are looking into this. I personally have taken a big step back because I've already been stamping on the billionaire's toes with big hobnail boots for a while, and I would rather other people do that particular heavy lifting than me. I've put the bug in a few ears, so at some point, hopefully this will come out. It's very difficult to hide. People being killed in this day and age. It's not easy. So there should be some sort of paper trail. There should be some sort of documentation that would ascertain, what actually happened out there. And I'm leaving it up to others to gain that.
So basically, like, would you look at it like, I mean, the gravity of what's happening out at Skinwalker Ranch, and like the people involved, like you said, like Bob Bigelow, like he's a big important guy. I mean, do you feel like it's almost like it's too risky? Like I would feel personally too risky to go poking around because, I mean, like who?
Well, no, it's not too risky to go poking around. It's too risky to go poking around and spouting your big mouth off when you shouldn't.
Okay.
There's a big difference. There's one thing looking into something. It's another thing drawing conclusions based on, maybe shoddy evidence and grandstanding and, going out and touting this and touting that and trying to make a big wave and get a lot of hits on your YouTube site or whatever the hell. No, that's not the way I operate. I like to stick to what I can factually demonstrate and what I can back up with some sort of documentation. And more people should take that approach.
Well, yeah,
it's interesting because around that time, I guess, is when we get the report that, for the most part, from all sources I've been able to scratch up on this topic, because there's really not a lot of people looking into it, that things have really, since 1999, things have really quieted down. It seems to be the official stance.
I wouldn't go that far. It's ebbed and flowed. We had quite an upsurge of activity. Well, it appears that we've had an alleged upsurge of activity in 2008, 2009, especially 2009, with the Dogman sightings. That definitely, there's outside sources. In fact, the event didn't occur on the ranch. It occurred a couple miles up the road in Fort Duchesne, where a canine sort of dogman, wolfman type figure was seen by quite a number of people, including law enforcement, and at one point was leaping between reservation houses, 20 feet, 25 feet,
wow,
between rooftop to rooftop. And I've been trying, myself and a couple of investigators have been trying to locate alleged cell phone footage that was taken by a witness of this particular creature, if you want to call it that. I just love in the Skinwalker book, though, the description of the dogman leaning against a tree smoking a cigarette. That's a classic. That's one of my favorite, trickster kind of, scratch your head, go, what?
Oh, yeah, for sure. In fact,
that's a classic.
Yeah, I think it was Colm Keller and George Knapp. They had a couple YouTube videos where they were talking about the book. And, there was a couple things that they discussed in those actual episodes that weren't actually in the book. And I think a couple of those, again, were related to the Dogmen and Shadowmen. I think. Don't quote me on it, but I remember coming across that and talking to Ryan and saying, I didn't find it in the book, and I was hoping to, because it was really interesting and bizarre, right? I mean, Dogman smoking a cigar. I mean, well, actually, that was in the book. But do you know what I'm talking about? Like, have you seen these videos?
I think, yeah, you're talking conference appearances that Knapp did. I have not really revisited. I probably should have been a little bit more prepared before I got on here with you guys, but I haven't read the book in a number of years. I have read it a couple, 3 times. Of course, at the end of the book, I am cited in there, and they do have some quotes in there relating to my work in the San Luis Valley. But that was in context of the importance of identifying window areas or portals or gateways or doorways in reality, if you will, for lack of a better non-definition. They kind of related my work as being similar to their work because of the variety and intensity of unusual phenomena that were reported in a very location-specific manner. I've been saying for years that we need to concentrate our efforts and our budgets and our talent identifying these regions, really marshaling our forces, and doing as thorough a job as we can with the scientific method to try and document as much as we can to further our knowledge. Of course, the classic story from the ranch is the 2 cameras in plain sight of one another, filming each other, basically. And one of the cameras going offline, and they check the footage. They go and check the camera, and all the wires were ripped out of the camera. And they went to the other camera that was filming that camera, and they found no indication of the wires ever being ripped out. So, even if you scientifically monitor an area, I mean, there's a classic example of the trickster where you can have an event that is totally inexplicable. You have no recourse in terms of coming to determine how something happened. So, even having said, let's monitor these areas scientifically, there's no guarantees that you're actually going to come up with anything you can hang your hat on. So, but I do think that you got to start somewhere, and you have to have people local in these areas that are within a local phone call away, that an experiencer can call, trust, be confident that when they come out as soon as possible, that they won't violate requests for anonymity or confabulate or embellish or sensationalize particular aspects of a case or publicize it, before it should be. So once you have those local people trained and on site, then give them the gear, somehow supply them with the scientific instrumentation to properly document this stuff and do proper field investigative work and follow-up investigative work and research, determining the extent of a particular series of cases or what have you. So again, this is a hall of mirrors with a quicksand floor with I don't know, just some sort of light show playing all around. I mean, it's a kaleidoscope that most people would have a difficult time even being in that situation, let alone trying to determine exactly what's going on. After 20 years of attempting to do, quality field work, I'm more confused now than I was when I first started. When I first started, I thought, oh, it's aliens coming down doing all this. Now, that is the least likely explanation that I would come up with to try to explain the variety and intensity of unusual occurrences in the San Luis Valley or the Sherman Ranch, for that matter. Yeah,
I remember in the book, they were quoted as saying something like, I mean, the most difficult thing about this thing was that they couldn't reproduce any of these activities consistently. Like, there was no way to determine when it would happen, what would happen. It was different every time. So it was hard to kind of come to a conclusion of what this could be. It's like nobody has any idea.
It's not a matter of them reproducing anything. It's a matter of the phenomenon doing something twice so that they could get baseline data.
Yeah, and actually, I got to mention a particular story in that book. I think it was my favorite one, and just get your opinion on, what you think it could be. There was a case where they had a camera set up. I believe it was infrared lenses on it, and they had seen one of the guys that were operating it saw what appeared to be like a portal open up, just like in the air, and like a shadow figure kind of crawl out of this thing.
Oh yeah.
Like, I mean, that spooked me, right? I mean,
Well, it's the identity of the scientist that was sitting there observing this, like sat out there in a chair like bait. There's been a bit of controversy ebbing and flowing over the years about who that actually was. I have my particular opinion based on my information who that was, but it doesn't really matter who it was. It was a world-class scientist who actually witnessed this, and one or two accounts mentioned that that individual swore he'd never go back to the ranch again.
Yeah, I'd be terrified personally.
Yeah, to have some sort of huge, hulking, shadowy figure crawling out of an aperture opening up in the air that appears to be a doorway to some other dimension. Yeah, if I saw that and I was some scientist with a pretty conservative reality view, if I witnessed that and was right there and it was right in my face and I saw that, I would have a hard time reconciling that. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean,
so with the myriad of events that are reported in this area, and in relation to, you made mention to the San Luis Valley, and I mean that's been the bread and butter. That's been your mainstay for a decade or more. And in reading some of the articles you've written, on the San Luis Valley and other people on the valley, I couldn't help but draw a lot of parallels between the Skinwalker Ranch area and the San Luis Valley. Do you think that the two events are somehow linked?
Well, again, you say the two events. It's two scenarios. I mean, we're not talking about individual events really necessarily. No, but why I was brought in and introduced to Terry and the ranch initially was because of that very fact. Zach Van Eck was quite familiar with my work and noticed parallels and thought that I would be a perfect person for Terry to be able to talk to try to get some sort of context or something. The guy was, groping around in the dark. This was so totally out of his reality view and his realm of experience. He needed somebody to talk to, and that's why I was brought in, because I had experience. At times, God, back in the 90s, I felt like I was some sort of amateur paranormal shrink. I mean, I'd have big burly ranchers crying on my shoulder saying, well, why did they take my best, my Bessie, my best breeding cow? They could have taken any of the other cows. Why did they take her? I can't believe they took my Bessie. You get to a point, where you're scratching your head going, what am I doing here? Why do these people think, that I know anything? I don't know Jack, man. And if I knew Jack, I'd probably want to rename him Joe. Again, this gets into, a whole realm of speculation. I have been for years touting some sort of interrelatedness or interconnectedness or some sort of correlation between these portal areas. I do think there are, on some level, some sort of connecting points, correlations between, areas that in this case, 450 miles apart. Just to have a report of a blue softball-sized orb, zipping around through the trees, and then within 24 hours getting a call from Terry Sherman describing the same thing that was somehow involved in melting his dogs. It's kind of hard not to think that, wow, maybe there is some sort of connective tissue going on here or something. But whether I can state that with all confidence and with some sort of authority, hell no. It's all speculation. It's all circumstantial. It's all coincidental, if you will, synchronistic, whatever. No, I don't think we can tie these areas together. However, the very unusual synchronicity, Tom Dongo here in the Sedona area has been compiling folklore type stories for 25, almost 30 years in the area. I met Tom early on in the early 90s, and we were in fairly close touch when we had waves of activity in Sedona here. Tom would call me and say, "Hey, what's been going on up there?" I'd describe things. He said, "That's the exact same thing that we've been seeing here." We even had one weekend where we had the exact same type of light phenomenon reported, and crashes of Air Force jets on the same weekend. So, I mean, it gets to a point where you start to scratch your head and go, wait a minute, there's just too much, coincidence going on here,
It comes a point when a coincidence isn't a coincidence anymore. It's too, they're too alike or too unlikely to happen for it to be.
Well, the odds are, billions, trillions to one in some of these cases. But again, can you actually take that to the bank and cash the check? No, you can't. You just have to log the data, scratch your head, come up with some creative, out-of-the-box thinking to attempt to explain this, or create a hypothetical situation where you could get repeatable data, as Ryan mentioned before. That's really important. To demonstrate repeatability is that's the Rosetta Stone of any scientific process. I mean, you've got to have that repeatability in order for it to be taken seriously, and that's one of the most impressive things about this whole subject matter is its total tricksterish nature. There's no way that the trickster is going to give you something to hang your hat on, and if he does, be really aware, because as soon as you identify a pattern,
it changes.
No, it gives you enough information to let you get excited, and you see the correlations, you see a potential repeatability, and as soon as you open your mouth, it generally does a 180-degree shift and does the exact opposite.
Yeah, it's
Not
almost
only does it change, it changes to the exact opposite.
Well, yeah, because it was explained, that blue light that had lured off Terry's dogs. He explained that this blue light acted almost as if it was intelligent, right? Like it knew what it was doing, and the more I hear about Skinwalker Ranch, the more it sounds like whatever it is playing with everyone.
Yeah, that's I've off the record, I've heard that from a number of people directly involved in the case. Yeah, in other words, not only is it playing with them, it's really messing with them. It's thumbing its nose at them, going nah 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 nah. It's not only just in kind of a disassociative manner playing with them. It's in their face, taunting them, I think would be the best way to put it.
Yeah, that is the best way to put it. So I mean, we got the book, and we got what has happened, or what we know, what's been released up to so far. But these suspicious deaths that you were speaking of earlier, that's news to me.
Well, again, we don't know if it's multiple. Definitely one person died. Whether there were other individuals involved, we have not been able to determine that yet. So watch the S at the end of death.
Okay, so the one that we know, is enough to get these.
Well, one that we don't know. The one that I have gotten independent confirmation from two other sources. There's a difference.
You're a lot better at this than me. I just, I'm a little bit, I just kind of.
Well, I'm very careful. Like I said, I'm very careful. I attempt to cross my I's and dot my T's.
I'm going to try and take
judiciously as possible.
I'm going to try and take those tips from you and put them into use. But, my memory is not so great, so I don't know how well I'll do with it. But
write it down, bro.
Tip number 1, write everything down. Okay. So,
So for a long, long time, a lot of people in the paranormal research, field felt that a lot of these different types of phenomenon were attributed to nuts and bolts craft, and over the last couple of years, it seems that a lot more investigators are leaning in towards another direction. That there's something more here than nuts and bolts. To further muddy the waters.
I hope you're right. Well, I'm saying I hope you're right that a lot of investigators are going in that direction, because I'm seeing a slight movement towards out of the box thinking, but for the most part, it's all aliens coming from other planets to either solve all our problems or eat us.
So, I mean, is it true that NIDS is disbanded now, right? Like the
They,
last.
they've been disbanded for 7 years, I think, 6 years.
So, who's up like checking out the ranch these days? Because like they do have people checking it out still.
And they just have security guys up there that are caretakers that are watching it based on what I know. I was up there last October with the Jesse Ventura conspiracy theory production team from A. Smith Productions. I went up there with Jesse's son Ty and Oliver Stone's son Sean, and we filmed a a day or so up there at the ranch, and had some interesting experiences, I must say. Had a interesting light sighting that was caught on video. This will all be coming out in this season of Conspiracy Theory. There has been some controversy surrounding, I guess give you guys a little scoop here. There has been some controversy why the third season of Conspiracy Theory was delayed for 8 or 9 months, and one of the reasons was they re-edited the Bigelow Sherman Ranch segment, and coming from a source within the production company, the original edit was way better than what is going to be shown when it's broadcast here this fall.
In other words, it's sensitive, and he doesn't want that getting out there.
That is your assumption, not mine.
Okay. Well, that's right.
I guess to further muddy the waters with this even more, I've read several, I guess, remote viewing documents that are sessions, documented sessions done on the site. And it keeps popping up, at least with the remote viewers. They keep reporting involvement with government agencies. Have you ever gotten any indication of that?
Well, my show, the Paracast, which is theparacast.com, broadcast every Sunday night. We're the 60 Minutes of the Paranormal, at least we'd like to think we are. We had a guest on a month or so ago who worked, allegedly, and I've gotten some verification of this, that he worked up there as a security personnel, and that... see, how would I put this? He claims that checks were being written to pay people up there from the NSA. Now, is that the Nevada Security Association, or is that no such agency? If you know what I mean. It's still, it's his particular allegation, if you will. But it would not surprise me in the least that Bigelow has become some sort of front cutout sort of entity that may be the deflection sort of public face for some sort of government involvement or activity up there. In fact, I would be surprised if there wasn't. There have also been indications of underground activity that's not location specific to the ranch, but in the region. There's another area that may be where the real stuff is going on. The Sherman Ranch may be a red herring now. It seems the activity may have moved. The entire Uinta Basin is a hotbed of activity. It does ebb and flow. It pops up here, pops up there. You do tend to see waves of activity centered around the north center part of the Uinta Basin, but what's going on in the south part of the Uinta Basin has not been covered, has not been publicly exposed by investigators. I have uncovered some amazing accounts, and others have uncovered some pretty compelling evidence that suggests the southern part of the Uinta Basin is a hotbed of activity, especially around the gas fields. You have your there's a belt of gas and oil fields that go from Grand Junction north over Baxter Pass up into the Uinta Basin up towards the Bonanza area. We have a number of very good sighting reports from the area, from corroborated reports, I might add. And and over to the west, north of Sago Canyon, at the very southern western side of the reservation there, a corner. There's some very interesting activity that's been reported, ebbing and flowing. So, there is the possibility that the ranch itself is kind of watch the puppet in the right hand while the real stuff's going on with the left hand, fairly close by, but elsewhere. So, whenever they say, Chris, keep your eyes to the sky, the first thing I do is put my ear to the ground. So when they're telling me to look this direction, generally, if people are having a sighting experience to the west, I'm going to turn around and look at the east because I know that something, is probably going to come up over the hill from the opposite direction. So I'm just that kind of guy. I'm a contrarian. So, again, if the government wasn't involved up there and all this stuff was really happening, I'd be very surprised.
So, Chris, is there anything like especially interesting that you've found down in the southern region?
Nothing that I can really talk about on the air. These are, kind of little research projects that are underway right now. It's a little too soon to really start, sharing those. But let's put it this way: if you did a triangle between Green River, Utah, let's say, west of Green River, maybe almost to Salina. North to the Uinta Mountains, and then down to Grand Junction. That triangle, there is some amazing stuff going on there. Not only with the paranormal, but just unusual societal, aberrant behavior, disappearances, inexplicable equipment breakdowns, just a whole bewildering kaleidoscope of unexplained events that have occurred, some more mundane than others. I have a sense that if you go directly south of the Sherman Ranch and then slightly west, you'll find an area that has even more activity. But you don't have the media exposure. You don't have people willing to talk about it to outsiders. And as more time goes by, and the more we uncover, and I say more, and I say we, I'm one of a number of investigators that have been working quietly, behind the scenes on this area up there. We need more local people up there to get involved. We need to get more Junior Hickses out there, Frank Salisbury's, Ryan Layton from Layton, Utah, and some others that are willing to do the heavy lifting. To really track down and corroborate and get some correlations between various events there. I think there's all kinds of activity going on in the area. It may have shifted the axis, or the center point of this activity may have shifted to the south, though.
So what do you think it is that makes this particular it's a kind of a broad area, really. I mean, we're talking about a broad area where there's all kinds of strange activity, but and I know that we have different spots on Earth that are known for this and that, but this area in particular is crazy, right? I mean, some of the craziest stuff that has come out of there. So, what's your thoughts on why?
Well, there's a variety of areas around the country. I mean, the Hudson Valley, around the Upper Ohio River Valley, Bucks County, southwestern Pennsylvania, around Mount Shasta, parts of southern Washington State, the Sedona area, obviously the San Luis Valley, which I think is a real linchpin for a lot of this type of thinking. We do have areas, and they all share 5 things. I've kind of adapted a theory that was originally proposed by Louis Turry years ago, and I've kind of, honed it down and added to it and subtracted from it. But if an area has unusual geophysical properties, whether it's maximum and minimum magnetic field strength, Earth's magnetic field strength in close proximity to one another, gravitational lows, the combination of alternating layers of water and clay, similar to what you see in Wiltshire, England, where the crop circles occur in that area. It kind of is like a natural battery where you have earthquake fault zones. If all these things are found in one area, and you have a oral tradition of the indigenous people in the area that goes back into prehistory, obviously, of unusual events occurring. Places in the area are considered sacred, and you have government or corporate interest in the area trying to expand into a particular area and gain more control. If you have those 5 elements in an area, chances are there's some sort of window, portal, gateway, vortex in the Sedona vernacular. Chances are it is a place where potentially reality is thin, and there is entrance and egress points for some sort of non-human intelligences. You tend to have a variety and intensity of unusual experiences reported there. So, yeah, I think that there's there's something to be said for that particular region. I think because it's become notorious, and there's been a bit of publicity surrounding it. It seems more important maybe than it actually is. There are other areas that this type of thing is going on routinely that does not get the media coverage, that does not, the word of this doesn't flow outside of the local community, that it's kind of people's, their own little secret. And, we can't, just because a place gets some publicity doesn't mean that it's more important than another place. I've been accused of the San Luis Valley, claiming the San Luis Valley is so important, this, that, and the other thing. And I still stand behind that. But it's a point well taken. Just because the media gets involved doesn't make it more important than some other place where maybe the same thing's going on and people on the outside don't know. So
Yeah, you're certainly right. That's true. I mean, some of the most interesting stories that you hear are on the fringes of the internet. You just stumble across it. Nobody's really talked about it, and you'll find these little, like the Siberian domes. I mean, there's not a whole lot on that whole story.
Headless Man Valley.
There you go. So, I mean, it's just a matter, I guess in this case, you got Bob Bigelow down here, and you got, the NIDS team went up, you got this book come out, there is more going on, so, more of us know about it, and it just happens to be pretty extreme.
Yeah, that doesn't mean it's more important than some other areas. It just means that word has gotten out about it, and, it's going back to the Copenhagen interpretation or the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. The very act of observing a process changes it. So, once you expose, some sort of activity in an area, and you bring observers to that, disseminate it out into the culture, spread it around through the media, that's going to have some sort of adverse effect in terms of changing the actual nature of the phenomenon. Generally, I think it chases it away. I think, you'll have a wave of activity, and as soon as the media gets involved and people start looking, it's like the trickster. It's mercurial. It squirts away and then it raises its curious head somewhere else. So I think it's like what's that game in the carnival? Whack-a-mole. It's similar to that.
Yeah. So I mean that's a really good point. I mean, you bring all this attention. I mean, you're talking about a possible intelligence. Like whatever this is probably intelligent. But going back to what you said before about like the magnetic frequencies or what am I trying to say here?
You're talking about the maximum magnetic field strength of a given area.
Yeah, the magnetic fields in particular, because I mean, I've come across a fair amount.
They're not independent fields. Basically, the Earth has a magnetic field, and if you look at the like an aeromagnetic map of a particular region, you'll notice that there's a gradiated level of field strength. And if you have high or maximum intensive field strength in close proximity to its opposite, minimum field strength, it's like looking at a topo map of a sheer cliff. All the lines of difference are very, very, finely spaced, and it's the same thing with the Earth's magnetic field. When you have those two opposites in close proximity to one another, you tend to have seams between them, and that tends to be, generally speaking, where a lot of activity tends to be centered in corridors of UFO traffic, for instance, in the case of the San Luis Valley. You tend to have areas that seem to have a predominance of activity versus other areas that maybe aren't along those seams. I'm being very general here, and I wouldn't hang my hat on this scientifically, but it is a type of patterning that I have been able to, I don't know, kind of ascertain. I think it's a good starting point. It's a good theory, but I can't prove any of this. All I can do is come up with ways to present a formula that we can use to boilerplate when we look for other areas that may not get the media attention or may not have the notoriety. Where else? Where do we have virgin investigative territory? Basically, just totally unsullied by Heisenberg, bringing outside eyes into a situation and potentially changing it. How pristine of an investigative environment can we find? And that's kind of always been one of my goals, is to find the areas that nobody else really knows about, do the initial work, try to have pristine conditions within which to investigate, and get it as pure a sampling of data, of accounts, of experiences as possible. Once you start throwing a bunch of notoriety at a case, you really have a hard time determining whether it's somebody wanting to piggyback their particular story on top of it because they think it's going to be cool to see themselves on TV or whatever the motivation might be.
Yeah, true. I could totally see that. I got to tell you, man, after hearing your stories, I'd love to go on if I ever got the opportunity, just to go out and see you at your work. Because it really does sound extremely interesting. Like, I don't know if you're aware, but me and Ryan are from all the way, well, Ryan's not where I am now, but I'm in Newfoundland, so it's this tiny, tiny place.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we don't have any of that really.
Well, I got a case over in New Brunswick for you if you want to
Oh,
head
really?
over there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what you got in New Brunswick.
Yeah, it's a rancher that's lost.
So several. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No, it's all right. I wasn't going to say anything. It was just my computer announcing some incoming mail.
Oh, okay. Several times now you've mentioned the trickster, and I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the trickster. Obviously, it's an archetype for to explain an overall phenomena, I guess. I guess, do you feel now that the trickster is responsible for a lot more of what we classify as the paranormal, the abnormal than maybe once we thought?
Well, equating responsibility to some sort of causal mechanism it's not kind of a word I would choose. The trickster is, as you mentioned, an archetype, one of a collection or constellation of archetypes that we share in every culture around the world. You have the shadow, the god, the goddess, the king, the queen, the wise man, the fool, the trickster. It's the same as the fool. The child, the mother, transformation, the mandala would be an example of a cross-cultural archetype. These things are found in every culture. The trickster happens to be the most primordial and ancient of these that has a face that's personified. The earliest and most primitive archetypes are faceless. They don't have any real identity. The trickster is the most basic and primordial of the archetypes that has an identity. However, the identity is neither positive, negative, young, old, male, female. It's not self-aware. It is amoral, doesn't have an agenda. That's the classic anthropological view of the trickster. It's this 3-year-old kid that bangs his little sister over the head with a baseball bat and jumps up and down having so much fun, not realizing he almost killed her. And then when he's punished, he doesn't understand why. That's more of the trickster in terms of personification. My book, Stalking the Tricksters, which I address this whole subject matter, it's my most recent book, looks at the trickster more as a causal mechanism to topple static structure, to pull the card out of the house of cards of control so that house of cards falls down to create room for the culture to change and move forward, to
introduce novelty.
Novelty and change, exactly. So, when people say the trickster, is he responsible? Well, no, it's a mechanism. It's that spark, that force that creates the change in binary code from a 0 to a 1. If you really want to get down to the basic building blocks of it, it's a liminal force. It stands in the doorway. It's neither in the room or out of the room, and based on chance, fate, coincidence, happenstance, it'll move into one room or the other. Generally, when it does, it has a very powerful effect.
My wife's starting to. She's going to want me to get off soon because I promised her I'd have this cleared up, even though I kind of want to go further with it. But I mean, if you're open to it, I'd love to do have you on again sometime because.
Oh man, I could go. I could fill up a whole year's worth of shows with.
Yeah, because like
I wouldn't know where to begin. We're just licking the tip of the iceberg, bro.
Well, and that's exactly how I feel, right? Because I just love hearing all the stuff that, in particular, that I haven't come across, and really, Ryan and I are fans of the paranormal, and we got very little under our own belts in terms of strangeness. We just kind of get to appreciate it from others.
Hey, you know each other. That's pretty strange, right?
Yeah, and we're pretty weird, so it works out, right?
Sorry, I couldn't resist. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay, man. We know we're weird, but we like it. But yeah, man, it's really some killer stuff. Especially hearing from the Skinwalker Ranch stuff, because that's one of my favorite stories come out of there. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah, I agree. It's the only case that pulled me out of the San Luis Valley.
Yeah, and you said you had like 13 years there, right? So it's got to be pretty big, right? I mean, to pull you out and get you up there and like, geez, what the hell's going on up here, kind of thing. So
I literally was there. I think I'm pretty sure within a day, maybe 30 hours.
I bet you were pumped going up there. Just hearing what you got to hear.
I wasn't pumped going up 100+ degree heat in an air conditioned truck, okay, with a smelly dog and two guys that were dogging me because they were in Utah and they couldn't find any beer.
Okay, well that part probably wasn't so fun, but I mean,
no, it wasn't.
But the prospect, though, right? Of something. So yourself.
It happened so fast, I didn't even have time to think about it. And of course, I hadn't read the article. I had just gotten a thumbnail sketch from Zach. I really wasn't up to speed when I went up there and talked with Terry. And I was really glad about that later, that I went up there completely an open book. And again, a little word of advice for aspiring field investigators out there. Never ask leading questions. It was like this, wasn't it? Or was it circular, or was it a triangle? You just keep your mouth shut, keep your pen going or your recorder going, and just allow the person to unfold their process in an organic way, and then gently ask for specific details based on what they're saying. Never bring stuff up that hasn't been brought up by the primary witness. I mean, that's cardinal, very important. Yeah. And that means when I left that ranch, there were a bunch of things that I wanted to ask. I wanted to see the video. I wanted to walk around the ranch. He did not invite me to do those things. I did not ask to do them.
So I guess
now I'm kicking myself. I wish I had, but there is a method to the madness, so to speak.
So I guess really, what we're talking about is respect the person that invites you up there. You want them to trust you. You got to be respectful of that, right?
Without question. That is primary. The guy wouldn't have been calling me every other day, reporting into me what was going on there, if I had been like certain investigators that go into areas that they're not local to and try to skim all the cream off the top and then go away, publicize it, and not give them the time of day afterwards. One of the most important things that I think the MUFON model, for instance, with UFO sightings fails to address is follow-up. You got to go back to these people and say, hey, you had something really wild happen 6 months ago. How has that changed your thinking? Has this made you ask questions about certain things in your community? How has your family responded to this? After you've established a rapport, then you can start asking questions and start probing a little deeper. That initial meeting is really important to totally be as hands-off, laissez-faire, as they say. Just allow the person to open up in their own manner, at their own pace, to the degree that they're comfortable with, and then you start following up. You start digging deeper, digging deeper. It's a process. You can't expect to meet somebody, get all the facts, walk away, and have an accurate idea of what's going on. It won't happen.
That's right. And I mean, I would imagine that a lot of the witnesses or victims in some cases of, these kind of events, I mean, they're probably coming from a skeptical background. I mean, and they're worried that like what people are going to think and stuff like that. So, I mean, as much.
How about if I give you an example? I had this one rancher. I forget. I think it was his brother or sister. It was some family member said, "Hey, something happened to so and so. They had something happen on their ranch, and you definitely should know about this. But they will not call you. They don't want you to know." And so, I'll wait a little bit, a day or two, and then I'll call him up and say, "Hey, it's Chris O'Brien here. I'm not sure if you know me. I'm I'm an investigative journalist here in the area. And, I got your name from so-and-so. And, hey, what do you think of your son's basketball team? Damn, do you think they'll go to state this year? How about the price of hay? I mean, are you going to pull out the dough you were expecting? Price of beef's going down, isn't it? Hey, it was good talking to you. I'll talk to you later." Boom, and I hang up.
Yeah, so it's like
Call him back a few weeks later. "Hey, it's Chris O'Brien again. Remember me?" Yeah, and have some excuse to call that has nothing to do with why you're calling. And by the second or third call, they will be blurting everything out to you, and you never asked. It works.
No, I think that is a really good methodology because I mean, you're talking about people who, they're looking for a friend really to confide in with some of this stuff because it's, and if they know that you're into this stuff, you investigate this stuff. I mean, they're once they get used to you and they're comfortable with you as a person,
then they're going to feel comfortable enough to open up and talk to you.
Exactly, and they're going to want to know what you think, right? Because I mean, you got experience with this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't always work. I mean, I've had examples where the more I call, the more pissed off they become because they know, they know that I want to ask the question, but they know I'm not going to, and then that makes them nervous, and it can backfire on you. But if you're sincere and really low key and relaxed about it, generally it's a good approach. And you just can't go in and try to splash the mud puddle dry. It just that'll backfire more times than not. So
for sure. So one last question before my wife kicks me out here. When you first went up on the ranch, did you get any perceivable feeling like like one of those things that's hard to put into words?
Nope, I didn't. I did not.
So
it was only when I went south about 60 miles into an area that we found some amazing stuff. That's when I got spooked.
Well, I'm going to be itching to hear.
I was not spooked at all. I wasn't spooked at all on the ranch. It seemed like a little slice of Ute Indian reservation paradise to me. I mean, to me, it was an idyllic location for a real super high-end cattle ranch. It seemed pastoral. It just had a bit of a vibe to it, but it was nothing that I perceived as being nefarious, negative, scary, spooky. None of that. None of it.
Well, I gotta say, I know you're not talking about the southern region yet, but man, you got me pumped now to hear what it is that you got down there that's just so crazy. So I'm gonna be all.
Yeah, we'll talk about that the next time.
Well, Chris, is there anything you want to add before we?
Yeah, I mean, in my first two books, I came up with 13 suggested rules of investigation. My first book was The Mysterious Valley, which you can get for like $2 on Amazon used. And then my second book is Enter the Valley. At the beginning of both books, there's 13 rules of investigation. Everybody out there, who is interested in becoming involved in field investigative work, if you would follow those 13 rules, I'll tell you, it's going to make life a lot easier. You're going to make a lot more headway, in a quicker fashion than you would if you don't. And it's really important to have a very systematic approach, have a proper grounded methodology, and to really document everything. The most important thing is to write everything down, no matter how inconsequential. And it doesn't have to be just UFOs or crypto creatures. It can be weird weather, weird crimes, unusual amounts of roadkill, strange weather, weird sort of apparent military activity. Anything that is out of the ordinary should be written down. When you go back and look at your log 6 months later, all of a sudden you realize, holy shit, there's a lot of parallels going on here. We have a lot of very interesting ducks lining up here, and dominoes falling one after another. At the time when you write the stuff down, you may kind of wonder whether it's important enough to. And if you ever have to wonder that, make sure you write it down, because later on when you review the data and look at the patterns, look at how things unfold, that's when it starts to make sense to you. It's Monday morning quarterbacking. It's 20/20 hindsight, but that is really important. If anything, the most important thing is to write everything down.
And you know what? I can agree with that. I mean, it reminds me. You know what it reminds me of is like, have you ever tried dream recalling?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and
I just had a dream last night that freaked the hell out of me. Actually,
and the only way that you can recall that is like, as soon as you wake up, you jot it down.
Have a dream
right?
journal right there by your bedside.
That's right. I did that for a bit. It was pretty interesting, actually. But yeah, I mean, Chris, it was a blast having you on the show. I mean, super interesting. I hope we can do it again sometime, actually, for real. Because I feel like we just opened up the can of worms. Right? We haven't even gotten in there yet.
I think it's a big old huge container ship full of worms.
I think you're right.
My opinion.
I think you're right. So, for everybody listening, thank you for listening, and of course, thanks to Chris O'Brien for coming on to our show. Again, if you guys have any paranormal stories or footage or what have you, I mean, you can send that to will@effedupstories.com or ryan@effedupstories.com.
Or ryan@effedupstories.com.
That's right. And with that said, thank you for listening, and goodbye.